This is one of those stories from scriptures that I like to call a woo-woo story, a miracle. One of those Jesus stories that ends conveniently with, after he walks on water, the observation stating the obvious, truly this must be the Son of God. But this is the kind of proof texting that is all too easy to do, that can be summed up in a very fundamentalist bumper sticker that says, you know, the Bible said it, I believe it, that settles it. This is a story, though, that may not have a lot of physics on its side, although I'm going to argue otherwise. But it has a lot of truth on its side. And I first learned that truth from a young man in my confirmation class named Henry. Henry had the misfortune in Berkeley, California, to be the son of 2 PhDs and not being terribly gifted in school. So he, like many 9th grade boys, hadn't quite figured out what he was going to, where his niche was going to be. He was not musical, and we had a fabulous youth gospel choir. He didn't sing. He wasn't an athlete, and he wasn't terribly long on brains. Fun guy, though. But as you can imagine, in confirmation class, he wasn't necessarily my favorite student because he wasn't terribly excited about deep conversation. He wasn't terribly excited about the singing. My husband John remembers that one of the funniest things he ever did was with him and his friend Ben, who was an equally ne'er-do-well guy. They brought us all to tears of laughter at the church talent show when they did their rendition of Amazing Grace, which went something like this. Amazing grace, something, 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 because our youth group had this great tradition of ending every campfire by joining hands and singing all the verses of Amazing Grace, which it's one of those things about welcome that we didn't realize wasn't terribly inclusive of our 9th graders who didn't know all the verses of Amazing Grace. But I'm telling you, by the time they graduated, they did. So Henry surprised me at our closing worship for confirmation because we were to go around and talk about, they were supposed to share what their favorite scripture was, their favorite story about Jesus. And it was kind of a funny moment because Henry said his favorite moment was that moment when Paul walked on the water towards Jesus. And I felt so sorry for him because everybody got a big laugh at his expense because of course he meant to say Peter. And I made Ben apologize for laughing at him. But I asked him, I said, why is that so important to you? Why is that story so important to you? And he said, because it helps me have faith. There isn't a science of how to help people have faith. We believe in this reality of this world. I believed very strongly in this rock that I got caught up in my shoe on the way down to the outdoor chapel. Peter was the rock who sank like a stone when he let go of his faith. In that moment, when things started to really get rough, the water really started to get rough. And I don't know about you, but I have had moments like that in my life, where the only thing there was to do was to kind of take a step out into thin air or onto thin ice or onto water, because fate or life or Jesus was calling me to do that kind of thing. Getting on the airplane to fly across country from California to Connecticut was one of those moments, I'm here to tell you. What was God thinking? But there have been many other moments before and since when I didn't quite know what to do, And all I could do was keep my eyes fixed on Jesus, at least what I thought I could make out as Jesus reaching out to me through the clouds, and take a step. I said to Jane as we were debriefing, I gave her her crash course in pastoral care yesterday because we have the blessing or curse of having about 5 people in the hospital. So we went to Danbury Hospital, and I said, we've had these people who've had surgery and they're recovering well, so it will be better than, one of my first trips on this kind of a thing where the person was very, very ill and dying. I said it's not quite life or death. But one of the things my mentor had taught me in seminary was that part of our gift, not just as pastors, but on your bulletin it says we're all ministers as Christians, is sometimes to have the courage to step out with a friend when they're on that swinging bridge between life and death, to help them hold on. Sometimes we become the embodied flesh of Jesus, that hard flesh that we need to hold on to when we're in moments of doubt and struggle. We can be that lifeline for others. And I've seen it over and over in this church. At our deacons meeting, we were just, one of our deacons was sharing with me a story of going to visit one of our parishioners and making a really important connection with the roommate, just by listening, not by evangelizing, but just by being there and caring. And I'm sure you've had moments like that too. The holy casserole brought to a neighbor. It's not about Jesus, but it is all about Jesus. The Word become flesh and alive, helping people to walk when they don't think they can. You ever seen those Jesus lizards? They walk on water. Our brother Dan McKee is walking on water this weekend, as I understand it. He's surfing. What my friends, the physicists in the Berkeley Church, taught me was this rock is not solid. It's made up of energy. They spend hours debating about whether matter is a particle or a wave. But this is full of light and energy and movement. The matter of all the universe is alive, and we live and move and have our being in this reality. It is not as solid as we think. I told you I was going to make a point about physics. Every day, we are taking steps out of our lives on faith. As a church, in our discernment process, in our planning task force, we take steps forward on faith. And I believe in what we are doing here, because we are a church that is not built on the rock of the Temple Mount in Jerusalem. I'm looking at Ken Arifian because he's church house, right? We are built on a rock ledge here. But we are not the Vatican. We are not Jerusalem. We have 5 layers of ancient flooring under this ugly carpet. We are the church of the pilgrims who stepped out and walked on water for many months before their little ship got here. We stepped out on vision, and we still are a church on the move, accomplishing miracles, because we know what it is to be a church that's more a movement than an institution. We are a church that's alive with the life that's within us. We were also observing in the deacons about how wonderful it is how many of our confirmands are so engaged in the life of our church. So many of our young people are coming back as young adults to help lead mission trips. The church that is built here is a church, as Jen preached earlier this year, of the living stones, building blocks of Christ's church are each one of you. So I wanted to close with a little story about dear Henry. Henry decided, when we did the announcement of where all these brilliant children of PhDs were going off to college, Henry was joining the military, much to the dismay of his parents, because I believe it was 1991. It was the first Gulf War. And Henry, the one who, the guy who would always stand up with the hymnal and never sing, surprised us at our closing worship of our spring retreat, where we would always have a campfire. It was at our equivalent of Silver Lake. We do it every year. And because the weather was iffy. You know how that is. You go outside, it's kind of cold, it's been rainy, it's kind of wet, but it's not raining now. Henry was like, we have to have the campfire. I was like, okay, we'll have the campfire. I said, why? He said, because we have to sing. We have to sing at the campfire, and you have to end with Amazing Grace. We have to join hands and sing Amazing Grace. I said, okay, Henry, we will. And so he was also, because he was an Eagle Scout, he was always the guy who ended the campfire, who stayed after to make sure we didn't burn down all of Northern California. And so that night, after we had sung Amazing Grace under the giant redwoods and this little patch, Leela knows, at Cazadero, patch in the sky of stars coming out, I thought it couldn't get any better. And then Henry said, will you stay after with me to watch the fire go out? The one least likely to be a theologian wanted to stay and talk. And what he said to me was, Pastor Bryn, I'm going to take this moment with me to Kuwait. And I want you to know that I'm going to be lying on my back, looking up at the stars in the desert, and thinking about my church, and all of you praying for me back at home. And it's going to give me courage. On a really bad day of ministry, I look up and thank God for all of you, living stones of Christ's church, still alive, still walking on water, still accomplishing amazing things of grace and love for this community and for the world. Thanks be to God for this good news.